Okay. Um, Good evening, Steve, and welcome on this show of inspiring conversation. Thank you for taking some time out and talking to us today evening. How are you?
I'm fantastic, thanks, Rupali, and it's a real pleasure to be here.
I understand you coach creative people. I mean, that is something that I'm really intrigued about to know. How does that process work? And uh, what is the cycle? What is your format? And why specifically creative people?
Well, I'll answer the last part of that question first. Why creative people? Basically, because that's my background. Personally, I'm an artist and I'm a writer. And these are just the people that I'm very, very comfortable with being around. I spent my whole life around artists, writers, musicians, filmmakers. So, that's sort of my natural community, if you like. Um, so I love working with these people, and in terms of the process, well, creative people, they're people, so they have the same issues that we all have. So it's really not about so much that grouping of people as opposed
Hmm.
to any other group, because they have
Hmm.
the same stuff that they're trying to resolve. But often the outcomes or the reason they need to resolve it can be a little bit different. So a creative person might get stuck on um, what to write in the next chapter of their novel, or
Right. Yeah.
what they're gonna create out of this piece of stone if they're a sculptor, or
Mm.
just how that part of the plot unfolds in a movie script. So there's lots of different blockages that creative people can come up against. And
Mhm.
so for me, the process is um, firstly identifying what that block is, um, and then diving deep into where that block first manifested, because usually you find that behind that block, that creative block, there's probably some emotional blockage there. It could be stress, it could be anxiety, it could be imposter syndrome. We all suffer from imposter syndrome.
Yeah, that's a very common one nowadays.
Absolutely, it is, and that can cause a major blockage for a creative person when they, I
Mm.
mean, I've suffered from it plenty of times in the past, and I trained as a sculptor, and of course, when I'm making a piece of sculpture, I'm comparing it with some of the greatest sculptors in the history of art, and
Mm.
then of course I think, well, I'm not that good.
Right.
I'm going to pretend I'm that good. But no, I can't convince myself. So we get into this whole cycle of um, comparing ourselves to people that we shouldn't be comparing ourselves to in the first
Mm.
place, and then trying to live up to that story that we've told ourselves about that other person, and
Mm.
always falling short, and in our own estimation. So it's about uncovering those stories, but it's also about looking at the psychological and emotional blocks that get us into that tangled mess in the first place, and
Mm.
then pulling them apart. So I'll take people through. Uh, Usually, I'll take them through a meditation practice. So we'll start bringing them into the present moment. Once you can get someone into the present moment, then we're trying to get them to be still. Okay,
Mm.
stillness is so tough for most people, but getting them to that place of utter stillness so they can see with clarity the whirlwind of chaos, which is normal life that they
Yeah.
are normally a part of, but they are now the still point in the center of that hurricane. And instead of
Mm.
being whipped around by it, they're watching it with clarity and awareness. And
Right.
when they do that, answers, insights just emerge out of nowhere. You don't even have to go looking for the solutions, they just come up. They emerge out of nothing, because you get into that space of emptiness when there is
Mm.
just stillness and awareness. Answers just flower.
Wow. I mean, just the thought of it is so empowering. But I'm a bit curious when we talk about creativity, isn't it some kind of self-expression? And from being a self-expression to like, to going towards something that we get into the comparison and then being the best or doing something that someone else has done. How do we get into this comparison cycle, from a from a point of expression to a point of comparison, and why are we driven there? How do we get there to that position?
Well, I mean, we're always, I guess to achieve in any sphere of life, whatever it is, it doesn't have to be a creative thing, it can be anything. We set ourselves goals, we
Hmm.
have plans for the future, and how do we measure that goal or that plan? Is it a
Hmm.
good plan? Well, it's only good when we compare it to someone else's plan or someone else's achievement. Is it that good? No, it's not. Yes, it is. So we get into that whole comparisons thing immediately,
Hmm.
where we're comparing what we do and what we want to achieve to what other people do and what they achieve.
Hmm.
And in a sense, that's, it does make sense that we do that. But is that helpful? Not always. It's not always a helpful thing because
Yeah.
we're not that other person. We don't have the skills or the resources that that person have. We have our skills, our resources, which might be better or worse than that other person's. And again, that's not a comparison we should be making. We are just who we are with what we've got,
Yeah.
and we just do the best that we can. But it is useful sometimes to look at what others have done as a if we want to achieve that level of greatness, to know what that looks like because someone else has planted their flag there is
Hmm.
actually quite useful in some ways. But then to try and beat them or match them, that isn't useful. We can see the place where we want to be, and then we just aim for our own goal. And if we get there,
Right.
that's great. But if we don't, that's also great because it's actually about the journey. The journey is the most important thing.
Yeah, I hear you saying, like, journey. It's a journey. We all have a, like, process or a path to walk on, and it's a journey to our goals. And also, what I hear is, rather than setting our goals against someone else's goal, how about we set our goals against ourselves? Like, how were we doing yesterday, and how better can we be today, and how well we can achieve tomorrow. So I think that shift of perspective might be
Mm.
helpful, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely, it is. I mean, it's always a process of
Mm,
of beating, not beating, but improving on where we were yesterday.
mm,
Becoming a better person, a better businessman, a better creative, a better husband, better wife, whatever. We
yeah.
should be moving forward all of the time in comparison to ourselves. But it is
Yeah.
useful sometimes to see if other people have been there. It's okay to recognize that. Yeah, they've got there, and I
Mm,
like that. That's where I want to go. I
yeah.
want to be at that place too.
Take the
That's
inspiration, maybe.
Yeah, it's inspirational. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But it's not about competing against those people. If we want a competition, it's about competing against with ourselves.
Yeah.
This is
Yeah.
how I was yesterday. Let's see if I can improve on that today.
Yeah, yeah, I hear that. And as I said, creativity is more about self-expression, I believe. And people who are already doing creative stuff would know what their creativity is all
Mm.
about. But in general, there are people like me who wouldn't know what my creativity is, or how can I express, or what is that outlet for me? How do we identify that?
Well, that's always a really interesting. This is a fascinating conversation for me because, on one level, I can say that existence itself is an act of creation
That's
because
profound.
every aspect of life is a process of changing what was previously, and
Hmm.
your existence is the destruction of your non-existence. Your non-existence was destroyed in the
Hmm.
process of you existing. So something was lost for another gain to be made, and that was a creative act. A
Hmm.
creation happened there. So the entirety of the universe is in the process of creation, moment by moment, and it never ceases. So we are all creative beings.
Hmm.
It's in our DNA. We cannot help it. We're constantly in the process of creation,
Wow.
replacing what was a second ago. But in terms of, you know, the things that we would traditionally consider to be creative, like painting, drawing, music, architecture, filmmaking, poetry, you know, all of these traditionally creative subjects, you know, if you go back to your first 2 or 3 years, 4 or 5 years of life, how did you express yourselves? How did we all express ourselves?
Yeah, I remember. I mean, having seen my kids now, it was mostly by actions or crying. I mean, when initially, then when they're so tiny that they can't talk or move, everything is through crying.
It is.
Yeah,
That they're expressing their emotions through that activity. But there's also
yeah,
one other thing that we do. We all do this. It's natural. It's built deep in our DNA. We draw. We all draw. We
right.
pick up crayons and we scribble on a piece of paper. We make marks, okay?
Yeah.
And then we learn to draw little stick figures or whatever. We are all artists at birth. You know, we are born. That is our first language. Most people, yeah, it is. Most people will say to me, look, I can't draw. I'm not an artist. It's nonsense. That was your first language. Before you could say a single word, you were drawing things. They were
Wow.
scribbles on paper, but that was your first language. Art is our primary language.
Haven't thought of that in that way. I mean, this is profound. I'm enjoying what you're bringing up on this conversation. Like
Yeah, I
art,
mean, it's
art is our first language. That's impressive.
absolutely it is. You know, written language replaces the drawing thing, which is what is in our DNA is that
Mm,
deep need to make marks, draw.
mm,
You look at the cave paintings, you know, these you go back hundreds of thousands of years, you see these primitive works of art inside the
yeah.
caves. You don't see little written messages next to those drawings.
Mm,
Language in that form didn't exist. Language was pictures. This is our primary method of communication. So on that level, we could say we are all creatives in any case. It's within our DNA. But
mm,
in terms of the sort of creative processes that we consider to be uh, uh, artistic expressions like music, poetry, etc. We
mm,
need to broaden that category. There are people that are doing coding. There's people doing graphic design. There's architects. There's people that are building amazing businesses. This is also a creative act. It's not just
mm,
about painting a picture, composing a piece of music, writing a
yeah.
poem. They're all fantastic things. But if you can build a business, how is that not a creative act? Of course it is. It's a process of
Yeah.
creativity.
Now, this makes sense because mostly when we hear creative in common language, it only defines the art or the creative work that we see professionally. But being a person who can create a community is a creative process. Someone who can who can build a business is a creative process. So that is really profound. I'm sure I have learned something new today. So so when this creativity is obstructed for a very long time, when people are unable to express that creativity, what do you think happens? What kind of outburst does one feel, or what what is it that we are missing? What when that creativity is obstructed, we are not freely expressing ourselves.
Um, I think when we get blocked uh, and we can't move forward, and I've been in this place. I mean, I remember when I was writing my last book, I got stuck on a particular chapter, and I was getting very anxious and stressed because I just couldn't figure out what on earth I should write. And I felt the same way as an artist. I'm a sculptor. I remember being stuck with exactly that same problem. What what should I make? I have no clue, and I could feel the stress and the anxiety building.
Hmm.
Didn't know how much discipline I was working in. The stress and the anxiety was the same. Um, and what that took, certainly as a sculptor, I remember what that took to resolve that particular issue was somebody coming to me and getting me to think outside of the box that I'd created for myself. I was trying to solve the problem inside the problem, and there was no way to do that. It was just completely impossible. I needed someone to pull me outside and say, look, there's the problem. get out of that and look around the edges, look for something else. And as soon as somebody coached me to do that, it was, wow, yeah, actually, now I see it. I can do that. It took someone else to see what I couldn't see. In terms
Yeah.
of the writing problem that I had, that was a different, although the feeling emotionally for me was the same, it was the same stress and anxiety, the resolution to that problem was very different. That was just a case of me having to tell myself, stop wasting time, sit
Mm.
down and write. Just write. And it doesn't matter if it's junk. You can take that out and throw it away later, but just get on with the job and stop making excuses around this block. The block isn't there. The block is a mental construct that you just need to stop believing in. And as soon
Mm.
as you're believing in it, wasn't there in the first place. It's gone. Yeah.
Oh,
And
that's something very important, because most of us in our day-to-day life as well, we're like, we keep so many things pending, procrastinate
absolutely.
so many things, because we think, oh, we don't have the perfect situation, the perfect idea, or the moment is incorrect. And
Mm.
we keep holding those things to ourselves and do not take action. So I like what you're saying, to clear that obstacle, or to clear that obstruction, we just have to go ahead and take an action to it
Absolutely.
and
Yeah. I
let the
mean,
creativity flow.
you do. I mean, a really classic way that writers deal with this so-called mythological writer's block, which frankly doesn't exist, but there's procrastinators invented that. But the way to deal with that issue is just to write. Imagine you're a writer, you get up, you have no idea what to write, you're stuck, you don't know what to write. Pick up your pen and you start writing. Yes, it's junk. Everything you're writing is nonsense and no one's ever going to read this stuff. But you start to clear that blockage by writing.
Right.
It breaks it down. And within 3, 4, 5 paragraphs, maybe a page, now you're in flow. Now you're writing the good stuff. Yeah.
Wow, I'm
How,
going to definitely pick this point up in my writing next. So
there you go.
when the creativity is flowing, how would you get this creativity channelized, or bring this creativity in a leader's life who's trying to build a new business maybe, or who is into a leadership position, who's responsible for a team, or someone who's waiting to take that leap into the leadership position but is not sure if that person is the right person. So how can we bring this creativity? How can we channelize this creativity into that role or position?
Mm. Yeah, I think if you're in that leadership role, you really need to be able to make creative decisions. You've got to develop that ability to think outside the box,
Hmm.
because all the great ideas are outside the box. They're not in the box. We're all in the box. They're not great ideas. We've all got access to that stuff. You want the great ideas, you've got to develop the ability to think outside the box. And it's a really critical skill to develop. And that can be done. I mean, there's all sorts of ways of doing that. There's lots of
Hmm.
different tools and techniques you can use. But again, for me, I guess 2 primary tools that I use. One, meditation.
Hmm.
Absolutely. Is just bringing someone to that place of stillness and still point. Because when you can do that, you can open up your awareness. Now, the Japanese, the Zen Buddhists call it choiceless awareness, where you just sit in this expansive, or your mind just sits in this expansive state, not focus on anything in particular. It's open to everything. And when it's in that space of complete openness, ideas and all sorts of stuff can just arrive. Yeah, some of it rubbish and you're not interested, but some of it can be amazing, incredible ideas that you simply could not have thought about with your normal processing analytical mind. You would never have got to that place. But in
Hmm.
that place of open awareness, this stuff can arise. That process of writing, stream of consciousness, will often throw up ideas as well. In the middle of all that rubbish that you're writing, there'll be a little
Hmm.
golden nugget that you'll just
Hmm.
later on, wow, that's amazing. that's incredible. I'm going to take that and see what I can do with that idea. So in these processes, you have the ability to come up with groundbreaking ideas that no one else would have thought of, that you can then use in that in your strategy, in whatever role you're in that business. But it's also, I think, with creativity in that leadership role, it's really also very important to recognize that what you have, your creative potential is not the same as your team's creative potential, and to actually allow them to express their creativity as well, allow them to tap into their intuition. Because once you get into that space thinking of, wow, I've got all of these amazing ideas and we're just going to run with everything that I come up with. Well, what about the amazing ideas that your team just came up with as well? Give them some space to express what they're coming up with as well. And it is, creativity should be a team effort. It's a collaboration. It's not just about you and your ideas, because when you pull all those ideas, you're going to come up with some amazing things.
Yeah, and that is really empowering, even to you as a leader and your team members, because they get an outlet to express themselves, and then they are best when they do that. And as you rightly said, you get some brilliant ideas coming out of such process of working. And there was one thing that I found, or rather audience would found contradicting, saying that, oh, being a leader, I have to juggle with so many things in my mind. How can I even think of sitting in a quiet place and not thinking anything and still getting my job done? So that is something I really liked about what you mentioned about meditation. And I work with so many female, high potential female women, across the globe. And being women, by default, we have so many roles to play, and there are few roles which are taken as female centric or women centric, like taking care of household, bringing up kids. Traditionally, these roles are looked upon, women are looked upon for these kind, like catering to these roles. So how can a female professional who's coming from such an overwhelming place use this creativity, use this outlet to lead in a position where she has to cater to multiple roles and identities that she is playing, and still be looked upon as someone who's as a leader, as a man, as any man can be.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff in that, Rupali. Yeah, I mean, first of all, I would say that, I can't remember who this was who said it. I think it was a Zen monk called Shunryu Suzuki, and he once said that everybody should meditate for an hour, unless you're really busy, and then you should meditate for 2 hours. Okay, and absolutely that is true. Everyone should and needs to find time to do this practice, because it will profoundly change your life. I don't care how busy you are. This should be number one on your to-do list every day. And because what that will do is it will bring your work day, your life, into much more balance. You'll be able to prioritize the daily tasks much more easily. You're not going to waste time on tasks that actually weren't that critical. You'll find that you've got more time. You'll spend half an hour, whatever it is, meditating. You will actually find you've got more time as a consequence of spending that time on meditation. Everything will become clarified and much more balanced. And that is going to, and also what will come out of that practice is a much more clarity over your own true nature, who you really are. You're talking about the different masks that women have to wear. Well, let's get all of those masks and put them in a box and shove them under a cupboard somewhere, because we don't need the masks. What we need is our own true, authentic self. And once we're in that space, we can stop being all of these other people a lot more. Now, that's not an easy thing to do. That's a journey for sure. But the more we can be our authentic self, the more we don't have to try and be this person and that person, and
Mm.
we don't have to be those things. But I think that addresses also the point that you were making about women, achieving or being seen to achieve, not being seen to achieve, but actually achieving in this very male dominated sort of patriarchal world that we live in. And I think when anybody, and this is not just women, when anybody can express their authentic self more and
Mm.
more, they just naturally get into that flow of
Mm.
that flow is success. Flow only leads to success, it doesn't lead to failure. So once you get into that flow of life and you're
Mm.
expressing your own true nature a lot more, being your authentic self, which means expressing your strengths and recognizing your own weaknesses and being able to
Mm.
work authentically on those weaknesses, then everything starts to flow in the direction of success anyway. And we also then start, or we get to the point where we're no longer making a comparison between, am I successful as a woman in comparison to this man or this group of people?
Yeah.
I am successful within my own right, and that is
Mm.
enough. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I really love what you said in the end. Like, there is no need for any woman who's authentically showing up to
Mm.
compare herself with any other women, and for a man itself, because as you said, once you are in that flow, everything seems to just like go with the flow, and there is nothing stopping you. You just become unstoppable. And I think that's where the leadership comes into play, and you are then able to bring that creativity, bring that
Mm.
inclusion within your team, and what you get is a success at the end. So
You do, yeah.
yeah.
I mean, and you just got to look at some of the big multinational corporations these days, like Google, Deutsche Bank, Nike, Facebook. They're all
Mm.
getting into mindfulness meditation. Why? Why are they giving their employees time off work to sit on a mat and meditate? Because it's good business sense. Because
Yeah.
it's skyrocketing their productivity. Their employees are more focused. They're taking less time off work. The companies are making more money.
Mm.
It's a
Mm.
win-win. The employees are getting much better, their well-being is improving, and the companies are making more money. It's just, there's no downside to this, and this is bringing people into that space of being authentically themselves.
Mm. So, so nowadays we don't have to worry about what more skill sets or what more course my employee should go to. I think the question here now is how best my employees are when they are working, and what best can they bring into work when they are spending 8 to 10 hours or whatever XYZ hours they are in the office.
Mm.
And I think that's also a kind of creative decision that leaders do take. And nowadays we
Yeah,
see that
absolutely.
trend changing towards our employees. And what I take from this conversation today is one is meditate, being more aware about yourself, about your creative process, about your transformation process, about your outlet, and this just be authentic self
Mm.
and bring that creativity into whatever you do, and success will be yours. Is that correct?
Absolutely, absolutely. Because I mean, it's when you're being your authentic self is naturally in the flow of creativity on a constant
Mm.
basis. When you try to be creative, you're now trying to do something that you don't understand.
Mm.
When you just be your authentic self, you are naturally a creative person. Creativity will flow from you
Mm.
just because you're yourself.
That's amazing. So not doing, but being is the mantra
Absolutely.
of the day today, is it?
Just be the still point at the center of the hurricane.
Oh, that. I had a very good conversation. I'm sure you enjoyed your time
I
talking to
did,
me.
absolutely.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you for this, for so many golden nuggets that you shared with us
Yeah,
today.
my pleasure,
And I'm
Rupali.
surely looking forward to having another conversation with you sometime in the future.
Looking forward to it also.
Have a great weekend.
You too. Thanks a lot. Bye bye.
Bye bye.